and welcome to this episode of the Love Procurement Podcast. My name is Kelly Barner, and I'll be your host for this conversation. Today, I'm glad to welcome Michael Stietz. Michael is a recovering procurement executive. He's formerly the Senior Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer at Körber Group, but he is now their Executive Vice President of Operations. So, hi, Michael. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, thanks, Kelly, for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be part of the Love Procurement podcast.
So, as I said in my intro, you managed to slip a little bit away from procurement's grasp. But tell us a little bit more about your professional journey, maybe how you ended up in procurement and then how you've more recently slipped out.
And maybe I start with my today's role. Yeah. So in my role, I oversee our global operations functions such as planning, procurement, production, logistics, and quality. And I also operate our biggest Körber plant in Pécs in Hungary. And before you said that, I held the position as Chief Procurement Officer of the Körber Group for many years. And for my background, I have an engineering and business administration qualification. And I started 20 years back. And since then, I always worked in operation, procurement, and supply chain roles for large corporations.
Now, what is something for you that you truly love about the field of procurement?
Let's say procurement was always, let's say, in a hard topic, yeah. And because procurement is to me one of the versatile functions, I always appreciate the diversity and the different tasks and responsibilities. Being able to work on global scale with so many internal as well as external stakeholders every day and generating remarkable values together, driving change and molding with that the company's future, that's always fuels me. And simply, I have always been and I will always be passionate about procurement.
Now, one of the things that I really appreciated in the conversation we had in preparation for today is the fact that you kind of have your own philosophy about how all of these things work together. So it's very common now, post-COVID, for us to think about procurement and supply chain having some kind of relationship, operations being in the mix as well. But you actually, prior to COVID, already had this idea that procurement would start to evolve into supply chain, would start to evolve into operations. I'm curious to sort of travel back in time with you and hear a little bit more about what you were seeing and noticing at the time that made you think that that evolution needed to happen.
Yeah, I always based my management philosophy on the question, how do we create value and set the company's future for our next generations? And procurement used to be seen as a kind of a dead-end road. I never agreed with that idea. And so spending billions working with thousands of partners should generate value and impact for every company. And it also requires this kind of team effort to influence cost, cash, and not just is a kind of functional task. Yeah? And for me, it is a natural to evolve from a functional view, just procurement, to supply chain, by adding planning, logistic, and quality into today's reality of operations with an end-to-end, let's say, mindset and behavior.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting, and you talk about being procurement at times being perceived as sort of a dead-end type of career. One of my very favorite books about procurement is the Procurement Game Plan. And those authors talk about how back in the day, procurement is where managers would send people that they never wanted to see again. And I remember the first time reading it, probably 10 or 15 years ago, thinking it was hysterical, but it's actually encouraging now because there's been so much progress that I think in most cases we can say it's no longer the way things work. And clearly you launched from procurement to being the head of operations. Do you think it was the combination of the elements in your background? Was it something that you managed to achieve while you were in procurement? What ultimately allowed procurement to become a launching pad for you to move your career into what some might consider a broader role?
Let's say, I would not just say this is just the procurement story itself, or because everyone can rise to a kind of whatever level, today would say the C-level role. For me, you can achieve that from any position. The main question is how we contribute to companies' success and future. And I guess this mindset has changed in the past years. Procurement used to be seen as a function that's just the executing task, like getting the parts ready or this regards. Yeah.
Mm.
But now it's much more than that. Yeah. You have the possibility to affect the cost, the cash, the quality, the time to market, the innovation, the sustainability, and many other value drivers. And if you are possible to influence these things right and well, you will get a place. You will achieve, let's say, the role, the place at the table.
Yeah.
You are deserved with that kind of influence.
Well, now that you have a seat at that table, when you think back to maybe a time, people will talk a lot about procurement not getting their due, or procurement maybe having to work too hard, or not being quite able to reach that seat at the table. Is there anything that you would observe turning around and looking back over your shoulder about either something about getting to sit at the table that was a surprise, or something that maybe it would help procurement teams and leaders who are still pushing towards the table to know about the process of getting there?
There are, let's say, we have to handle complexity right. And complexity, it's not just starting with the first question. And so what kind of value you are delivering to company success. This is for me that at the end, the result, and that's for sure, we should never lose the focus for this one. But it starts with important question. And here you need this kind of functional strategy, expertise, the clear view and the clear way going forward with how we combine data and technology today, for our purposes, for our use. And so how do we set the tone in our operating model? How do we inspire the people and the teams? And then for sure, it all comes together in the overarching question, how we generate value for the company. And this is, let's say, the procurement role evolved over the years. We are not just seen as these kind of executors, transactional task fulfillers. It's more like, or just the cost pusher. Yes, this is definitely a role, but as I mentioned prior a bit, it is cost, it is cash, it is process, it is quality, it is innovation. And let's say here you have a bunch of opportunities you should use to, let's say, transform your procurement, supply chain, and operations organization going forward.
Well, and one of the things that I imagine has probably changed your focus is taking that step towards the table has also put you much closer to Körber's end
Yeah.
customers. And so now that you're spending your days in much closer proximity, how has that influenced not just your view of your current role, but also maybe some opportunities that at times might go unnoticed or underleveraged for procurement to create customer experienced value?
Let's say it confirmed earlier that our strategy to transform procurement into supply chain and align it with operations is correct. Because our customers, and I guess every customer, expect a prompt and accurate order execution. Here we need that kind of innovative and cooperative attitude, and we cannot meet this expectation on our own. So therefore, it is necessary, and we require reliable partners with trustworthy relationships. And so this is a real an influencer game, because so many stakeholders, so many opportunities, and let's say it is needed that there must be a kind of orchestrator or conductor to steer, let's say, the different opportunities in the right direction.
Well, and one of the things, and this is something that I've certainly seen sales and marketing do it, right? They'll profile who is the target persona, who are the different groups of people we're trying to reach, how many of those are currently in our customer base, and where we may be looking to expand. It would actually be interesting to have procurement go through that exercise, even to get in the abstract in our minds. Who is it that the company is ultimately solving? What are the problems or the opportunities that might present themselves to those customers? And how can procurement make sure that the work that they do, whether it's direct spend or an indirect spend, actually helps improve the situation that those different personas experience? I wonder how many teams, whether they've gone through sort of this continuum you talk about with procurement, supply chain operations, even bring sales a little bit closer to procurement so that you're understanding whether it's packaging, whether it's branding, whether it truly are direct materials that are going to a customer's hand. Can you close the loop on that knowledge and that understanding to really help procurement have focused in their mind, what is it we are ultimately trying to achieve? Have you had the chance to see how that understanding of customer needs can be filtered back into procurement strategically so that the way they approach their job truly is customer centric?
Let's say there's a clearly yes. Yeah, if we would not, let's say, also listen to the customer as a procurement supply chain operations organization, we would do something wrong. Yeah, and so there must be a close loop between all, let's say, internal function, and it starts for sure with, let's say, the innovative part, that we have the right offering and we contribute from a procurement supply chain operation perspective also to, let's say, with the suppliers and all that stuff. Yeah, that we have first the right offering for the market, as well as then, let's say, if the customers are telling us clearly what their expectation is, because they could be different. Some customers can ask potentially for, hey, I need your best pricing. Others would like to have, let's say, the best overall equipment efficiency, and the next one is targeting for the latest innovation, whatever possible on the planet. Yeah, and let's say we have to listen. We have to listen carefully, and then we have to act as one team, because at the end, let's say we fail and we win as one team and not a function, from a functional perspective. Therefore, I always try to overcome these kind of, okay, on my business card stands procurement, or my business card stands this and that. Yeah, for me, it's about we must act as one to win as one.
And one of the other customer objectives, I'm sure that comes up a lot, and it's certainly an opportunity for everybody to win, is around the organization's handling of risk. Now, we talk about risk a lot, and it means a lot of different things. It's like a deceptively small word when we think about all the different things that could be covered. I'm curious, does procurement think about risk and therefore manage risk any differently than operations or customers think about risk and therefore manage risk?
I guess I can just a bit repeat myself. Yeah, so we
Sure.
have to overcome these challenges by working and acting as one.
Mm.
And of course, different functions have different perspectives. Fair enough. But at the end, we are one company, one team with one goal, creating value and customer satisfaction. Full stop.
And you certainly can't achieve any of that without having digital support. We've been joking in a lot of the conversations that we've had this year that it's 2024. You have to talk about AI in conjunction with everything. You have to talk about process automation, digitization. But really, where that hits the road is around the user experience.
Yeah.
If we're explaining a process, something is wrong. If we're forcing people to use technology, we're doing something wrong. If people are confused about where to go get their stuff, just to simplify it, we're doing something wrong. How have today's digital capabilities, you talked about being in procurement for decades. What are some of the changes you've seen in the supporting technology that have allowed procurement to mature and evolve in terms of what they can achieve?
Let's say with one word, tremendously.
Yeah.
Just tremendously. Without digitization, we could not meet all the current demands. Let's think 5 years back in time. Sustainability, supplier portfolio risk management, many other topics are on the agenda today. We are not really discussed. And digitization has been and will be the ideal way to continue to save resources and, let's say, reprioritize or reorient our organization towards activity that create value instead of just processing tasks and pushing paper all day. Yeah? So it's tremendously, and it's a must-have for an organization, let's say, to reshuffle the focus.
Yeah. Is there a chance that any of this could end up being a distraction? Where procurement gets so focused on the cool digital stuff that we sort of take our eye off the ball in terms of the maybe human to human experience that some of our stakeholders want us to provide?
Let's say the major task is for procurement itself. It's first of all to listen to your clients and customers. Let's say clients and customers are the internal requisitioners. Yeah, that everyone who needs something to get to have the best and provide the best job at the end, and for sure to our customers, to our external world. Yeah, and here we need time. Yeah, we need time, and time, especially for value-driven activities. Yeah, and if we just, let's say, outline maybe two major processes in a daily procurement and supply chain and operations environment, yeah, is this kind of, let's say, plan to strategy. So what's going on the markets, yeah, which kind of intelligence I do have, yeah, for my teams, in my teams, yeah, that I, let's say, develop the right category strategies and all that stuff. So herefore I need time to prepare myself, to know, yeah, where we are today, where we would like to go tomorrow, and all that stuff. And then the most important one is the supplier lifecycle process, that we have time as an organization, let's say, to deal and to discuss and to negotiate and to innovate together with our suppliers. Yeah? And many companies have thousands of suppliers. Körber also, yeah? We have thousands of global suppliers, and thousands of suppliers are thousand opportunities, We have a claim for us, market leadership through our technology leadership. And if I would be a market leader and I would be a technology leader, I need, let's say, a broad supporter base, not just everything is invented by ourselves. It is also the supporter base coming out of the partners / suppliers to say, hey, look, yeah, this is a huge, tremendous force, and we should use it right, yeah, in our favor to be in the best position. And yeah, therefore, let's say there's a great chance for all of us.
Yeah. Well, your point about time is well taken. I think it's hard, and I'm sure operations is no different. There are so many things to do, right? But when you talk about opportunity, strategy, relationships, a lot of that actually comes down to each of us being able to create space so that we have time to think, time
Exactly.
to get some perspective, time to, maybe if it's relationships or strategy, sit down and talk to somebody without being quite so worried about the things you're trying to check off the list. Um, how do you, given how incredibly busy I'm sure you and your team are, create that space and allocate that time so that you're not just doing all the things that you have to do, right? That you're also allowing yourselves to think and go to that next level.
And here, let's say that the key word is for sure digitization, yeah? Because we all experience that there are more topics on the agenda than 5 years ago for a classical procurement and supply chain environment, and with all the let's say growing complexity. You are totally right. Yeah, we need more time, yeah, for alignment. We need more time for discussion. Yeah, how we solve, let's say, questions and challenges of today and tomorrow. Yeah, that's definitely, let's say, a huge task, and therefore digitization is exactly here in the right spot, yeah, to let's say to use modern technology to have latest solution in place, that the teams are enabled, yeah, to work different compared to 2, 3, 5, 10 years back, yeah, and to free up this kind of resources and reallocate, yeah, in the best way that you have time for your supplier, in your supplier lifecycle process at all, yeah, for your plan to strategy, in your negotiations. And then for sure, the administrative work is something we have to do. Yeah, there are these kind of regulations. They are great, all good. But at the end, let's say the value sits from a procurement perspective with the supplier and with the discussion of with the internals, so that we have the time to influence, let's say, product costs, service costs. Yeah, so right at the beginning in the product development and in general in the ideation process. Yeah, and then goes over the next steps with the suppliers and stuff like this. Here, there is the money, there is the cash, there are the innovations, and we must be on that spot.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things that you invested in, both when you were CPO and also still now, that I think is a little bit unique, is communications planning. We don't often think about that, although I think procurement is a little bit of a victim of not wanting to self-promote, right? That old idea of, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, does it make a sound? Like, does procurement ever make a sound if we're not talking about what we're doing? What are some of the investments or techniques from a communication standpoint that procurement can use, not even to necessarily do more things, but to make sure that word of what they've already done and an understanding of what they can do actually reaches the decision makers that we're trying to influence in the company?
First of all, yeah, And coming back to our, let's say, strategy perspective, we have a strategy, a dimension. It's called "We Inspire People," and how we inspire people. And so this starts with all the HR questions about recruiting, succession planning, and retention, and all that stuff. But it goes over this: how we collaborate, how we network, and how we communicate with each other, especially and let's say, I guess most of the listeners are working in global environments, in global companies, and sometimes I say, if you are more than 20 people, you should think about how you communicate, because that is so important. And my advice is always, all leaders should prepare a clear communication strategy, and I mean effective communication with, let's say, first of all, it starts with, do you know your audience? And so identifying your audience, crafting specific messages you would like to transport, using various formats and channels. And let's say the most crucial thing for me is always communicate for a successful transformation. And that sounds so easy, but let's say, to bridge this into the reality, this is not so easy at all, on a global scale. But it is manageable, it is reachable, and for sure, and this is also an advice, this is not just a communication department task. They must support here. But at the end, from a functional perspective, I have to think about, let's say, how do I communicate with my community? And in most of the cases, we are talking about hundreds of different people, and so with different time zones, and these are, let's say, in most of the cases, just the closest circle, and then you have the suppliers, you have the internal stakeholders, In our case, we run the company with 12,000 employees, so I have potentially 12,000 internal customers, and I have thousands of suppliers, and I have to think about, how do I communicate? How I set the tone and the message, and the transformation going forward. And therefore, this is, let's say, for me, always crucial for successful transformation. Communicate.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting because we talked earlier about the potential opportunity associated with procurement getting a better understanding of external customer personas. Of course, there's value in that. But when you think about being able to take a much shorter step and say, okay, who are your personas internally? Who are those people? At least they're within the company. If the one opportunity is somewhat on the horizon, certainly compelling, but a little bit more of a stretch, it feels to me like an absolute no-brainer for procurement to stop and say, to your point, whether it's geographically, functionally, in terms of business unit, who am I trying to reach with what message? Exactly. We don't do that, and then we're shocked we have compliance issues. Right. And then, of course, we come out of the gate and we're punishing people. And so trying to think about understanding who we need to reach, that feels to me every bit as important as category strategy, right? Exactly. Negotiation strategy, partnering with suppliers, getting into the heads of our internal stakeholders, absolutely essential.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about you moving from procurement to operations. We've talked about sort of your evolutionary view where supply chain and logistics come into the mix. We've talked about communication strategy and the role of digitization. We always like to sort of boil these conversations down at the very end to sort of one key piece of advice. We think of it as sharing the love to sort of stay on theme. If there was one thing, Michael, that you would want people to come away from this conversation remembering, what would be your one key piece of advice you'd like to leave with them?
It's a real short one. Procurement, supply chain, operations is a great place to be.
Awesome. Well, I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of pushback on that. Definitely not from me. And I'm positive not from the people that are either listening or watching today. Michael, if people have heard this conversation and they want to learn more about your philosophy or the work that you and your team do, what is the best way for them to reach out and connect?
The best way is check out my other activities on my LinkedIn page, LinkedIn profile, and let's stay in contact. Let's connect. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Michael, thank you so much for being with me today and sharing your journey and your insights.
Thanks for having me.